Well, we're in a different era in international relations.
It feels like the macho man time in the global politics.
The US stepping back from some of its commitments in the world.
US would pay over 800 billion more through 2029 if Russia wins.
If Ukraine won't come to the table, then the United States could threaten to withhold aid. If Russia won't come to the table, then the United States could threaten to increase aid. I think as we try to figure out how could Trump approach Ukraine, one of the big things to be looking for is where does the center of gravity in his administration lie? Who has power? Who has decision-making influence? The United States needs to coerce. Ukraine is a partner. Ukraine is an ally. If the United States wants to broker peace, it should do so hand in hand with Ukraine. And I think that it matters what happens in Ukraine for everybody else. I want Ukraine to succeed because I want democracy and freedom to succeed.
Hello, I'm Jenny Klochko, and you're watching my podcast, the platform for guest stories beyond your daily newsfeed. But at the moment, obviously, I'm itching and aching to give you the stories we prepared, and it's nothing to do with global politics or this statement, the other statement. But I can't avoid and can't ignore a big day. It's coming for Donald Trump, his supporters, while in Ukraine it's very uncertain mood. And today I have the best person from DC to discuss it. He was already on our podcast, and that was brilliant. Such powerful insight from Doug Klain. Hi, Doug. And if you
It's
haven't
great to
watched,
you. Thanks for having me back.
oh, always welcome. So if you haven't watched our first interview with Doug, please do find it on the YouTube on my channel and enjoy it. You will. There's Speaker Johnson was convinced to support Ukraine with basketball and the Bible. I'm not gonna tell anymore. Please do watch and enjoy it. So, Doug, Trump's inauguration coming. So, what's the mood in the White House? What's the mood in DC? And how does it feel there?
What a great question. You're starting off the interview with the easy stuff as Washington gets ready for Trump 2.0. Really, everybody is waiting in Washington right now, waiting and seeing. Everybody's holding their breath for what's going to come next. We've experienced a Trump administration in the United States before, and it was unlike anything that we've experienced, yet. And we're going to go for round two with Trump now. At this point, I think as of our interview, it is 1 week exactly until Trump has his inauguration and takes over. Fortunately for me, I think I will be escaping Washington, D.C. that day. It'll be a very busy day. I'm heading off to Europe and off to a trip back to Ukraine. And so I'm looking forward to that. And I think it'll be a much more productive place to be as Washington is in the middle of inaugural balls and galas and parties to celebrate the new Trump administration. It'll be a very hectic time in Washington.
So you're not sad to miss all the fun.
I'm not sad at all. I think the buses are all shutting down. They're going to shut down much of Washington D.C. and there's going to be, I think, quite a lot of people coming from out of town to see Trump inaugurated, to line up on our mall and watch the Capitol there as he takes the oath of office. And then a lot of folks will be coming for all these balls and galas to celebrate. But I think that when Trump takes over, things will move quite quickly. He is promising immediate action on day one. It looks like some of his top priorities are going to be first. They're saying that he's going to issue something like over 100 executive orders on different actions, but that his priorities are especially going to focus on immigration, the border, and a lot of domestic issues are what he's going to be, immediately turning his attention to. But of course, we know that additional top priorities are for the Trump administration to start working on the war in the Middle East with Israel, Gaza, and also Ukraine, which I think is, of course, most relevant to our conversation today. And I think we'll have plenty to talk about there.
Absolutely. You were saying it's the easiest. So what's the hardest in terms of this coming inauguration and part of this executive orders? Is this something which really worries you, make you unsettled?
Well, I think that yes, there are a lot of things that do worry me personally, and we're going to be watching to see, especially what happens with Trump's domestic agenda. One of his top priorities is, what he calls mass deportations of deporting, millions potentially of people that are here, undocumented in the U.S., which could upend quite a lot in our economy. But of most relevance, I think, to our conversation is, his agenda for Ukraine. He has named, retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, who was Mike Pence's national security advisor during the last Trump administration, as his special envoy for Ukraine and Russia. This is the person who has the mandate, so to speak, to negotiate a peace in the war, to find a path forward. Now, of course, Trump had promised before that he would end the war in 24 hours or even before taking office. He has since dialed back those expectations, and Kellogg has said, that his personal goal is to find a solution within 100 days. That's often a popular benchmark for most new presidents. What can they get done in their first 100 days in office? And they are saying that they want to try to end the war by then. But Trump himself said, I think famously now during a press conference in the last couple of weeks that the war between Ukraine and Russia, it's much more complicated than anybody could have guessed, and solving this war is much more difficult than anybody could have known. I'm sure that has come as a surprise to many people. But Kellogg is, expected to hit the ground running, I think, even if Trump and others in his administration are busy in the opening days with either the domestic agenda or the war in the Middle East. Kellogg, his remit is Ukraine and Russia, and so and I think everybody is watching to see what are his first moves. When is he going to go to Kiev first? There had been reporting that he had a trip planned to go to Europe, including to Ukraine. Actually, this week it looked like, and they postponed that trip potentially because it may not have been a very good look for incoming officials to start doing meetings and trips before they're actually in office. And so I think that everybody's going to be watching to see, when does Keith Kellogg go to Ukraine? Who does he meet with? And what does he have to say? What news does he have to bring? We'll see what happens.
Yeah, but he also outlined his points in the research paper published by America First Policy Institute. It's a pro-Trump think tank. And in the document published in April last year, I think Kellogg advocated a formal US policy to seek a ceasefire and negotiated settlement of the Ukraine conflict. And as far as I talk to the experts or the people who have to say something, it feels like they push in Ukraine into something. And for example, one of the things to put the psychological pressure on the society and President Zelensky, it's about the age of the mobilized soldiers. And on one hand, you look at it, and when America had their wars, they mobilized people from 18 till 35 years old. So considering, these people have the most physical ability to fight. But at the same time, it feels like Ukrainians pushing into the corner to accept some conditions they are not prepared to accept from sort of starting point. Would you agree on that?
So what one quick point on the mobilization age. I mean, for the U.S., the United States has not had a draft, has not mobilized soldiers since the Second World War. We have had an all volunteer for, or actually, I mean, sorry, since the Vietnam War. We have had an all volunteer military for over 50 years now. War has not touched Americans in everyday life for generations now, and so I think that we're of course coming from a very different standpoint when the United States is talking about mobilization. Ukrainians, I think, have a much more realistic view of what age and some of these conditions for mobilization can do to a society, and it's good for Americans, I think, to listen to that experience. As for Kellogg's plan in particular, Of course, when Kellogg was named as this special envoy for Trump, everybody goes back, and including me, to look at what is everything that he has written and said about Ukraine in recent years. And much of it is I think quite good from the standpoint of pro-Ukraine voices in the United States. It's a lot of it is quite in line with what we tend to hear from pro-Ukraine Republicans, for example. That plan in particular, and I remember when it came out, it really is not so much a vision of what should an end to the war look like. It is a proposal for how to begin negotiations, for how to begin talks. And so many of these things that Kellogg and his co-author Fred Fleitz propose in that America First Policy Institute report are things designed to bring Ukraine and Russia to the table to talk, including some of these proposals about if Ukraine won't come to the table, then the United States could threaten to withhold aid. If Russia won't come to the table, then the United States could threaten to increase aid. Now, of course, the context in recent months, I think, has been very important for the incoming Trump team, and they have started to understand it. Ukraine is not the obstacle to peace. And it's been very good that, Ukrainians, including President Zelensky, have, I think, gone to great lengths to show Ukraine is not an obstacle. Ukraine is not, a belligerent that the United States needs to coerce. Ukraine is a partner. Ukraine is an ally. If the United States wants to broker peace, it should do so hand in hand with Ukraine. Negotiating position is stronger when the United States, Ukraine, and the rest of Europe, for that matter, are going into this together. And so Zelensky has been emphasizing this, which I think has been quite important for shaping how Trump and those around him think about Ukraine, because I think it's quite important for us to remember at this point. In many ways, relations between Ukraine and the United States are I think, resetting in some ways. The way that Joe Biden, the way that U.S. officials have thought about Ukraine as a partner and the United States' obligations to Ukraine to support Ukraine, that has been a given since the full-scale invasion started almost 3 years ago. I don't think that's a given anymore. Trump does not have, I think, the same commitments to these ideas of international law, of sovereignty, that most U.S. officials do. And he doesn't think about the United States' obligations to Ukraine. What do we as Americans owe Ukrainians? He doesn't think about that the same way that the current outgoing administration does. And so it's important for Ukraine, but everybody really, to not only educate incoming officials, but to show Ukraine is an ally. It's a partner that the United States should work with. It is an asset for us to work together with Ukraine.
Let's have a look at the other Trump supporter, my favorite, Elon Musk. And one of his statements when he was saying about the aid of Ukraine, we have to kill Ukraine aid because there is no way in hell Putin is going to lose. How powerful is that? And I get he almost every second of his tweets, it's a provocation. And but as a businessman, how he should know that actually if Ukraine loses, and American Enterprise Institute, well-known conservative think tank, they published this research saying that US would pay over 800 billion more through 2029 if Russia wins. So it's untrue. So US is interested economically for Ukraine to win. It's going to cost them less. So that's the reality of statements. What's your take on all of this?
So that report from the American Enterprise Institute, AEI, I saw that, and it's a really phenomenal bit of scholarship, and it's been quite necessary for American officials to have that kind of information. I don't know that we've had that kind of a report come out yet. It was big news when in Germany they had a similar report on what would the costs be to Germany of a Ukrainian defeat. And I think that was quite powerful in impacting German political discourse around support for Ukraine. Of course, there's quite a lot of work still to be done there. But for the United States, nobody had really quantified what would the cost be to the United States of Ukraine's defeat, of failing to help Ukraine win. And even this AEI report is somewhat conservative. They put a figure of $808 billion in the next 5 years only, in the very short term, if Russia prevails in Ukraine. And so this is a somewhat conservative figure, only for 5 years. And I think that figure is going to be quite important for the discourse in Washington as we talk about the future of U.S. support for Ukraine. And of course, these have always been, I think, bad faith talking points from those in Washington who already oppose U.S. support for Ukraine. We've seen other groups, the Heritage Foundation is one of them, that comes up with a lot of these talking points about what is the cost to the American taxpayer of U.S. support for Ukraine. And there was a really notable example of this last year, I believe. We had wildfires in Hawaii. And as the United States was putting out this disaster relief to help U.S. citizens in Hawaii that have been impacted by these natural disasters, the Heritage Foundation at the time was saying, unfortunately, people in Hawaii are suffering because the United States sent all their money to Ukraine. And of course, trying to divide people and turn people against Ukraine by using the suffering of a natural disaster like that as an example. We're seeing similar things from people, including Elon Musk right now, with these wildfires in California, as they say, unfortunately, we sent all the money to Ukraine and there's nothing to help Californians. Of course, they ignore the fact that I think artillery shells and HIMARS ammunition would not do a lot of good for wildfire victims. But these are people, I think, who are already innately opposed to aid to Ukraine. They're using these, sometimes made up figures as an excuse, as a talking point to try to divide others about it. There are some who argue in good faith, and they can be educated. I think our organization, Razom for Ukraine, has done good work in trying to educate and share the realities of U.S. support for Ukraine. And this report from AEI is going to be very helpful in continuing that work. But there are some people who cannot be convinced because they don't want to be.
Doug, it's a very good point, and I think it's about the money and the aid for Ukraine. We have to say that 90% of those money which for aid to Ukraine, they stay in the US because they invested in the American plants, factories, and it's for the American citizens. It is, yeah, the product sent to Ukraine, but this actual money stays within the country. The other thing, I know we're speculating, but I hope for your political experience, expertise, and your intuition. So the question is going to be long, but it's just a little bit to look at it, what's coming from the historical perspective. So the initial question, is Donald Trump going to be a good president? Because for Ukraine, I mean, because in my opinion, I was preparing for our interview, and none of them were good. None of them. If we start from George Bush Sr., during his speech in Ukraine, in the Ukrainian parliament after he was seeing Gorbachev, I mean the chicken Kiev speech, and he was saying Americans will not support those who seek independence in order to replace a far-off tyranny with a local despotism. They will not aid, again, blackmail, aid those who promote a suicidal nationalism based upon ethnic hatred. So you understand why I'm referring here. Bill Clinton helped Ukraine to get rid of nuclear bombs and signed the solid and reliable security guarantees which never worked. Obama was sending duvets in 2014 and refused to send lethal weapon when Putin invaded east of Ukraine and annexed Crimea.
I also spoke several days ago with President Putin, and my administration has been in daily communication with Russian officials.
Donald Trump was he was blocked the military aid for Ukraine, which was agreed. It was 400 million aid package because he wanted, this impeachment situation and Biden's son, and so there was a culminating in a call between Trump and Zelensky in July 2019. So now Trump coming second time, and Biden was too slow, too weak, not up to immediate decisions, and not using the strongest points for a negotiation. I mean, when he was saying no American troops on the ground when there was the very beginning. So your intuition, your political expertise, is he going to be not bad, at least for Ukraine, the Trump 2.0?
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint, but the answer is I don't know. Trump will be either a good president for Ukraine or not, and it's up to him how he approaches this, and he is still keeping all of us guessing about what that approach will be. I think as we try to figure out how could Trump approach Ukraine, one of the big things to be looking for is where does the center of gravity in his administration lie? Who has power? Who has decision-making influence? We know that there are many who surround Trump with different views about Ukraine. There are some who I think have quite more traditional pro-Ukraine views. These are people like nominee for Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Trump's pick for National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, and Keith Kellogg, as we've talked about before. These are much more traditional Republicans with traditional views about America's role in the world and our interest in helping Ukraine win. They all, I think, understand what America's interest in helping Ukraine win is. Of course, there are others. We've mentioned Elon Musk. There's Trump's pick for Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. There is also Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. I think that they have quite different views about U.S. aid to Ukraine and our interest in Ukraine. Vance, of course, famously said that he doesn't care what happens in Ukraine. He, in the Senate, was one of the I think strongest opponents of U.S. support for Ukraine in the last 3 years. As the Trump administration comes into office, these different factions are going to be vying for influence. They are going to have what I think will be potentially messy, but cage fights really over policy behind the scenes, fighting for influence, fighting for who gets Trump's ear, who does Trump listen to, and whoever wins those fights, I think, is going to be quite influential in dictating what Trump's policy is. Trump himself, doesn't have, I think, a particular outcome that he wants or a way to get there. He has been very clear of he just wants the war to end. And he's leaving it up to others to figure out what does that look like? How do we get there? And so it matters what faction is empowered to win that argument behind the scenes. That's what's going to dictate, is Trump a good president when it comes to Ukraine or not? And I think that's what we're going to have to watch for. One quick thing to mention back to your original question on the history of presidents in the United States and the way that they've treated Ukraine. I'm glad that you kind of walked us through each one of these presidents and where I think U.S. policy has often gone wrong when it comes to Ukraine. There is some excellent scholarship from Eugene Fischel, who is an official at the U.S. State Department, and he wrote an excellent book on the history of U.S. relations with Ukraine. And one of these interesting things that I think he found is that U.S. policy towards Ukraine since the end of the Cold War has often dealt with Ukraine not as direct U.S.-Ukraine relations, treating Ukraine as really a sovereign state in its own right, with agency, with interests, but treating Ukraine instead through the prism of Russia and U.S.-Russia relations. This Russia-centric view of U.S. policy towards the region. And of course, there are historical reasons for that and reasons why, one of the U.S.'s top concerns at a certain point was nuclear proliferation at the end of the Cold War. And, things like that have influenced relations. But it's perhaps a more promising thing that we have seen in recent years, certainly since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, is the United States and other countries starting to treat relations with Ukraine as relations in their own right and understanding Ukraine's agency, not putting it as subordinate to Russia. That I think for all of the flaws of Joe Biden's policy towards Ukraine, of which there are plenty, that is a significant departure from the way that the United States has treated Ukraine in the past. He treated Ukraine as a sovereign state in its own right, and that is an important thing. Now, is that going to continue under the Trump administration? I personally have my doubts, but we will see. But that is an important departure that we did see under the Biden administration.
Doug, interesting. You said I was popping up this question. I noticed with the British journalists, even those who support in Ukraine because it feels trendy, but if the journalist was based in Moscow for many years or wrote the book about Putin or Moscow, wherever, and then go to Ukraine because of the war, even their rhetorics, what Putin wants, how Moscow wants, how we can help Putin to save the face. And it's just looking at this Putin not as a mass murderer and criminal, but it's like mysterious Russian soul, which he is not. But if the journalist from London went to Kiev because of the war, their starting point of courage is absolutely different, and they don't get it. Well, you see, this stigma is so strong, but hopefully all of this will change.
Yeah, I mean, and one quick thing with that, that has been for all of the horrors of the last 3 years. So many more people are discovering Ukraine, and they love what they see. It's so easy to fall in love with Ukraine when you come to it and see it on its in its own right. And that is I think one of the important things that we have seen in recent years. To have more journalists, more government officials who see Ukraine and see it in its own right. That I think is a positive thing that can only help.
Doug, just yesterday, finishing preparation for our interview, I came across this picture. I sent you the picture with this current leaders or the leaders to be. And it feels like, if we sort of like the general point of view, it feels like the macho man time in the global politics. So when Putin was talking from point of threatening and force, and he was playing with muscles and this and that blackmail, at that time felt like other leaders, European countries or the countries across the ocean, they were not ready for the kind of rhetorics. Now it feels too many boys wants to change the world order, and all these boys, they have armies, they have power, they have money. In a way, it makes them equal because they all talking, nobody's scared of each other. But is this gonna do good to all of us?
Well, we're in a different era in international relations. You can call it the era of macho man politics, of strong man politics. In a lot of ways, we're seeing, I think, the end of this post-Cold War era that we had been in for, almost 30 years or so. We've seen points where these changes are more pronounced. And I think that for a lot of us, certainly here in the United States, 2016 and the election of Donald Trump was a marked change in how the United States is acting on the world stage. And seeing how Trump's election the first time, I think, emboldened a lot of these other strongman, macho man leaders around the world. It goes to show the value of having powerful states in the world advocating things like international law, respect for human rights, respect for democracy, for sovereignty. And when there is an absence of that, those anti-democratic forces that are out there, those authoritarian forces who believe in things like might makes right, they are empowered, emboldened. And I think that even after Joe Biden was elected in 2020 and during his administration, we've seen that Trump was not an aberration. That period where we saw things that I think are really associated with that era of We saw Brexit, we saw Trump's election, we saw the rise of more far-right politics in Europe. Um, you know, it's not a little blip on the radar. It's not an aberration. This is a new period we're going into. And I think it's something else to emphasize there when we talk about U.S. politics and the role of the U.S. in the world. Um, Even if Donald Trump had lost this most recent election in November and the Democrats had won, Kamala Harris was the Democratic candidate. Um, I think that we still would have seen these trends of the U.S. stepping back from some of its commitments in the world, stepping back from its, this view of the United States as not just leader of the free world, but guarantor of European security, as the anchor of transatlantic security. Um, Joe Biden, in some ways, was kind of the last transatlanticist president of the United States. Kamala Harris was not as the same kind of politician as Biden was. Bred up in the Cold War and viewing themselves as this leader who understands the same threats facing Europe. So I mean, U.S. politics are changing in quite profound ways in the Democratic Party itself. It's not as extreme or as pronounced, I think, as the Republican Party, but there is not the same forward-leaning policy towards security, towards our security commitments, towards the transatlantic alliance. And I think these are big changes that the United States is undergoing, and that has very serious implications for, most immediately, the war in Ukraine, but also Europe and European security as a whole. Um, so that is a long and roundabout way to say, yes, we are in the era of macho man or strong man international relations. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. And especially with Trump back in office, I think that those forces are only going to be accelerated.
Do you feel sorry for Democrats? They lost the election, and now when the world in such tense situation, it feels like the wrong time not to be at the power, not to influence on the top decisions in the world. What's the mood within the Democrats in the DC?
Well, I won't pass a personal judgment of whether I feel sorry for the Democratic Party or not. But I will say the mood is bad. The mood among Democrats is quite dour and I think helpless right now. The Democratic Party is in some ways rudderless in the United States at the moment. This was a catastrophic defeat for Democrats in the election. It was not just a razor thin margin here where Trump eked it out quickly, but it was they lost both the House of Representatives and the United States Senate as well as the presidency. So in a lot of ways, the Democratic Party is searching for what comes next. How does it rebuild itself? When it comes to aid for Ukraine, Democrats in Congress, I think, are stuck waiting to see what comes next. There has not been real action in Congress since the November election on Ukraine aid, because the Republicans who are in power, Speaker Johnson is the leader of the House of Representatives and decides what goes on the floor for a vote. They have said we're not going to do anything on Ukraine until Donald Trump comes into office and he tells us what the priority will be and how he wants to approach it. Republicans don't want to get out ahead of Trump and do something that he may not like on Ukraine or that may undermine the preferred approach that he'll have. And so that's meant that nothing on Ukraine is happening in Congress. And Democrats have understood that and have just stepped back a bit. So it's an unfortunate state of affairs, certainly for Ukraine, as everybody has been in a wait and see approach, waiting until what happens on January 20th.
Doug, when you talk about Ukraine and mind your regular visits to Ukraine, it feels like you have a special place in your heart for Ukraine. And I know you discovered Ukraine on many levels. Why do you like Ukraine? And why this country sort of resonated with you so much? And what do you like the most about it? And I feel so jealous that you go. Are you going to stay for invasion anniversary?
Unfortunately, I will not be there for the anniversary. I'll just be there in late January. And so I will not be there at that time. Um, what do I love most about Ukraine? What a wonderful question. I mean, I think it's going to sound like maybe a trite answer, but I love Ukrainian people the most. I'm endlessly inspired by Ukrainians. Especially in the last 3 years. I think that people around the world are immensely inspired by courage, determination. The truly the fight for freedom in the United States or in the world is happening in Ukraine, and it's a burden that Ukrainians should not have to bear, and they should not have to bear it alone like they have. Um, but it's still tremendous and inspiring. Um, I care about working to help Ukraine because I believe in democracy, because it's something that is under threat in the world today. It's under threat in the United States. And I believe that if Ukraine can succeed, if Ukraine can show that a young democracy can still triumph and prevail over an authoritarian country trying to dominate it, uh, that should inspire Democrats, small d Democrats around the world. If Ukraine can triumph, so can we. And I think that it matters what happens in Ukraine for everybody else. I want Ukraine to succeed because I want democracy and freedom to succeed.
Thank you, Doug. Your enthusiasm, your energy is so contagious, and you're saying about Ukrainian people inspiring you every time when I talk to you. It's like you're so inspiring yourself. Thank you very very much for your time, for sharing your thoughts, insights, and as always, it's so exciting to listen to you and so useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me on today. It's always a pleasure to chat.
Klain from Razom from Ukraine explained us the peculiarities of the current situation in Washington, D.C., what to expect, and so many things we don't know. But a few things he pointed out quite interestingly and quite powerful. Let me know what you think, our listeners from the US. Probably for you, it's more resonates strongly than anybody. You're going to be having a new president with all his promises and decisions. If you support Donald Trump, please let me know what you think. If you're brokenhearted because of his win, share why you feel so, and what's your thoughts about your future and your country. Any questions, any thoughts will be welcomed, and I love your comments, and thank you for all your supportive words, for your likes, for sharing. It's amazing. Thank you very very much. I'm Jenny Klochko, and thank you for watching me.